Hey everyone, this is Paul Bertorelli reporting for AVweb. Today is September 5th. We are 4 days past a momentous announcement in general aviation, and that's the approval of the first unleaded 100 octane fuel. And these two gentlemen with me, that's Tim Roehl on the top and George Braly below of General Aviation Modifications, Inc. Have spent the last almost 13 years developing this, and finally, we've got an STC. And this applies to all spark ignition engines in the FAA database, which is a lot of engines and airframes. So let's start by saying where we are now. So this STC is out there. So where does it go immediately from here for GAMI?
You know, Paul, for years, some of the uninformed folks that were critical of what we were doing and how we were doing it were saying, well, it really doesn't make any difference if the FAA issues the STCs because nobody's ever going to make this fuel. You know, no refiner will ever make this fuel because it doesn't have an ASTM specification. Well, within 36 hours after the STCs were signed, we had inquiries from two different, major refiners in the country wanting to know what they could do to help make the fuel. This has always been a chicken and egg question, but in this case, we had to get the STC signed before you could get anybody, some big company. They can't go to their board of directors and get a budget to start making fuel for something that the FAA has still got in limbo. But almost instantaneously, once that happened, then we started getting phone calls. So we're deep into that process. Exxon shipped us a load of one of the premier or one of the essential components to the fuel as a test batch. It arrived here 2 Wednesdays ago, and we're using it to make maybe a 10,000 gallon batch of fuel here on our ramp. So, now that we've got the fleet-wide AML STCs approved, we can actually get somebody's serious attention on how to get the fuel made and distributed. AvFuel's been essential in helping with this, and they're going to continue to be essential in vetting the producers. We've made it clear that any qualified refiner / producer that can meet the quality assurance requirements that are part of our FAA approved quality assurance manual that's already been done. It's already there. It's not something to be done. It's already dead done. That they're going to be allowed to jump in and join the party and produce the fuel.
When do you think you'll have an announcement if a major refiner has a market development plan?
I don't know. And, we'd both be lying to you if we told you that we had a firm date. But what I can tell you is that we've been in serious negotiations for that for over 6 months with one of the large ones. And they've reviewed all the documents. They reviewed all the licensing agreements. They've so far not expressed any unhappiness with any of that. By the way, they've also reviewed all the certification file and included the detonation data and the material compatibility testing, and they found it to be acceptable and satisfactory to their technical people.
And we've taken it about as far as we thought we could, given where we were and are. And it has always been a build it and they will come type of scenario, because I go back to 12 years ago when participating in the ASTM unleaded Avgas committee, we heard from the current Avgas producers that they weren't going to invest any capital to do anything other than take the lead out of the current formulation. And, hearing that and knowing both what could be made in terms of better quality unleaded fuels and their unwillingness to move forward, we just said, this is something we're going to have to do and certify. And once done, there will be people to make it.
We should point out at this point that although traditional avgas these days comes out of refineries, because we only have 5 or 6 in the U.S. that are refining leaded avgas, this fuel doesn't have to be made in a refinery, correct?
Correct.
That's correct.
So that gives AvFuel some flexibility in engaging potential producers of this fuel. Where are they exactly in this process at the moment?
So our structure, it's not a legal term, but a practical term, our partnership arrangement with AVfuel is that they have this vast experience. They're on 400 and some odd airports as FBOs. They have a huge staff that vets and supports their activities, and they're technically very knowledgeable. They have access to some infrastructure in terms of rail cars and trucks and stuff like that. And so they're going to do the preliminary vetting of anybody that wants to produce the fuel. And once we've agreed that they're appropriate and appropriately qualified, then we'll send them a license. They'll sign the license agreement, and they can begin to produce the fuel under the FAA approved license agreement. And then AVfuel's basically going to be in charge of managing the details of that distribution network. It's not going to be GAMI. And we've got a written agreement with AVfuel that any competent producer will be able to produce it. And we've also got a written agreement with them that anybody that wants to buy it, if there's an available supply, that the FBO or whoever can buy from any one of the producers without having to have a special arrangement with some existing oil company. There's a huge economic advantage to that for the end user, because right now there are thousands of instances every year where somebody has to buy fuel from 800 miles away and have it trucked in when there's a refiner 200 miles away, but they don't have an existing special relationship with that local refiner. And so there's logistical infrastructure wastage that is going to be eliminated. This was all AVfuel's idea on how to make this more efficient. And thank Craig Sincock for putting this together, this aspect of it together.
In order to help keep the costs down, it makes sense to start with the existing logistics and distribution system, certainly, and producers. Some of these current producers are better suited to make this fuel than others. But AVfuel thinks we probably don't need more than the 5 or 6 producers that we have today in terms of numbers.
Of course, the fact that it's a component fuel and you can ship components in and blend them anywhere gives a lot of flexibility, but it also introduces complexity because now you've got those transportation costs on those components. So that I can't imagine that is an easily figure outable thing. I mean, you can put numbers on it. You can start to put numbers on it and see where the optimum production scheme lies, but that's going to take a while, isn't it?
Maybe, maybe not. I mean, yeah, it will take a while with absolute certainty, but it is not a foregone conclusion that it's going to introduce any additional transportation costs. And like I said, by having put in place this equal opportunity access to the nearest available blender or refiner for the FBOs, we then take away any excess costs that might have been put into the process on the front end from having to ship components.
Where are you on price? Are your estimate is still 50 to 80 cents higher than low lead?
You know, look, that was based on some economics and studies that we did back in 2017 and 18. Oil prices were different then. All of this stuff comes from petroleum. Frankly, I haven't had the clock cycles available, given all the craziness that's been going on with the FAA for the last year and a half, to go back and revisit those numbers. But at that time, it looked like that we could get this done typically for less than 90 cents a gallon more than what's presently on the table for going out the fence of the local refinery or blender. I don't think that, you know, that's going to change substantially. It'll go up and down with the cost of the components, but part of that is you know, kind of fixed costs that aren't particularly variable with the price of petroleum.
Address for me, if you would, the criticism that if I'm a buyer of 100 low lead, and by buyer I mean a distributor or an FBO, I can get a copy of D910 and look what's in that ASTM spec, and I know what's in it. I can't
Not
do
really,
that.
Paul.
I can't do that with this. So
No, that's
address
not
that
true,
for me.
Paul. There are no chemical composition requirements stated in the current ASTM D910. It's all performance specifications. It's whatever you can put in it that meets the performance specifications. It's just a limited amount of chemistry that can fit those. But the G100UL, unlike D910, does have component limitations on it. So it's actually more clearly specified in our spec than it is for ASTM D910.
And anyone can get a copy of that spec.
Anybody that's a licensed producer could get a copy of it. And then when an FBO buys the fuel from the producer, there will be a certificate of analysis that goes with the fuel to the, in the truck that goes out the fence of the refinery in exactly the same way that happens today.
Well, I could also, it seems to me, if I were ambitious, I could go look at the patent and get a pretty good idea what's in this.
Of course,
Perhaps
or
so.
even better.
I mean, I'm not,
Now,
I'm not wishing to produce it. I'm just wishing to know what's in it. So why can't I do that?
you can, and matter of fact, we had somebody do that this week. I mean, you've probably seen the press release from GAMA in which they say, well, nobody knows what's in the fuel. Well, that's just pure sophistry on the part of GAMA and its president, Peter Bunce, because within 24 hours after the announcement, I got a phone call from France, somebody I didn't know that didn't know us, didn't know what we were doing, and he wanted to participate in making some of the components for use in Europe. And I said, well, do you know what's in the fuel? He said, oh yeah, I've already figured that out by looking at the patent architecture. He did that in less than 24 hours. What's the problem, folks?
Yeah, it's a figure outable thing, I'm sure.
There's something else, Paul, that's really important about this. All of the D910 Table 1 properties, if you'll look in the ASTM D910, it is all done with these performance specifications. Those were all invented in 1940 using available laboratory techniques that date, 100 years out, more than 100 years out, or 80 years out. We have incorporated modern laboratory chemical analysis techniques and more up-to-date laboratory techniques in the specification and the Table 1 properties. But if you took the certificate of analysis of G100 and took the identifying marks off of it, you would have to be really smart to figure out which one was and you took out, whether or not it did or didn't have lead. You'd have to understand this subject pretty well to figure out one was versus the other one.
Going out into the market now, so the initial market penetration will happen over the next few months. You are going to do some data analysis with one of the major launch customers. That'll be the California Aeronautical University. How's that going to work, and what do you expect to learn from it?
Well, first, a big shout out to Matt Johnston, the owner of California Aviation University. He has stepped up to the plate. He's fully on board. I checked with him and got his permission to use his name about 10 minutes before we started this. And so we're going to use a subset of their fleet on a structured, accelerated monitoring program just in order to document what's going on. A key feature of that is going to be the use of modern technology, i.e. Chemical analysis of the oil samples. And the beauty of using a well-maintained, well-documented existing fleet is they've got a long, unbroken history of every oil change, sending it off for a molecular analysis, just like you see in for wear metals in your existing oil samples. That if you're a good Part 91 operator, you like to do that to monitor your own engines. So we'll be able to compare the historical practice on a specific engine and then compare it going forward in those high usage airplanes. And we can get 250 hours on each one of those airplanes and engines probably in the next 90 to 120 days after we start and kick off the program. And then we can sit there and do a statistical analysis to determine if there's been any change. If the wear metals don't change in the oil, then the wear metals don't change, on the piston or the rings or anything else. And so that's the correct, scientifically valid way of doing that kind of a program.
Of course, we've already done long-term endurance testing on the fuel as a part of the certification process. Embry-Riddle did a 170-hour endurance test in one of their 172s that was pretty much done independent of us, but they had an interest in helping certify the fuel and wanting to evaluate the fuel. And we know that it performs beautifully in their airplanes. It was not an issue. They tore the engine down after running on the fuel. There were no serviceability issues. The combustion chambers were implicitly clean, unlike running on the leaded fuel. So they were very happy with it.
Are you satisfied that there aren't likely to be any surprise detonation issues in the very corner of envelopes of some engines?
More than comfortable, Paul. Sometime when you got a chance, I'll walk you through the detonation report. But the full power, full rich detonation characteristics of this fuel are not only better than 100, 130, 100 low lead, they're better than the old purple gas that was 115, 145. The other end of the spectrum, the so-called lean rating or operation in the intended area of operation, turned out that the min spec G100 performed very slightly better than the min spec 100 low lead by the FAA's analysis of the data. They were here in person. It's not a significant advantage. It's not something that you would celebrate, but it's identifiable. But so basically, it's no change whatsoever in the cruise configuration or the intended area of operation from 100 low lead, and at the full power, full rich rating, it's actually a significant improvement.
Do you think the fact that the FAA has finally gotten off the dime on an unleaded fuel approval, does this change the landscape for the other potential competitors? Does it break the dam?
I hope to God that the FAA doesn't continue to do things in the way that they have in the past. There was pretty clearly a lot of indecision. I mean, the team that was charged with the primary responsibility for doing the certification work on our fuel changed 3 times in the first 8 years, 9 years of the project, with whole new casts of characters. That's pretty hard with respect to continuity, and certainly wasted an enormous number of Tim Roehl and George Braly's clock cycles. But when they finally put the most experienced fuel certification team they had, which was the Wichita Aircraft Certification Office, on this project in July of 2020, then we had an STC 12 months later, and then we had the fleet-wide 12 months after that. What's not to like about that?
Yeah, so I will take that as a yes, that this should improve the process for everyone.
It should for anybody else. On the other hand, they have to have the technical basis and understanding of some of these issues, and use the correct methodology for testing. And some of that's not public information. And because it's proprietary, it's been approved by the FAA, but they're not allowed to, to share our proprietary information with everybody else. So, presumably they're technically competent people.
Well, yeah, what that means for people who don't understand this process, if another company comes in and wants to produce this fuel, they bring their own test protocol, which the FAA oversees and approves. And it may be similar to yours by happenstance, or it may be different and still get to the same place.
Yeah, but I mean, for instance, it took 15 months to do the means and methods of detonation testing to get that issue paper, that formal high-level issue paper, through all the labyrinth of the FAA's bureaucracy and get it signed off. By the way, as we sit here today, that is still the only, one and only detonation testing means and methods that has ever in the history of the FAA been approved by their high-level issue paper process.
And speaking of issue papers, the tab review at the end of this process had initially requested additional issue papers. Was that all dropped?
I think it happened like this. When the tab came out with its initial proposal, which included not a requirement but a suggestion that the FAA consider additional issue papers.
Right.
At that time, Air 700, the guy that's oversees all the certification offices, that was Mel Johnson. He made a commitment, which you've heard me talk about probably back all the way at Sun and Fun, that he would allow the engineers at Wichita to make a study and a disposition of each of those recommendations. That actually got pulled off the table, and we went through an enormous amount of monkey motion. But to her everlasting credit, when the new Air One came on board in June, and she dove into this project in July, she looked at it, and frankly, she knew that this project had taken way too long. She's a pretty decisive lady. It's Lirio Liu. And I saw that little cartoon skit you did, and it caused me to chuckle pretty deeply. But she came along, and I don't know this, but I think she told the certification folks, you guys have been mucking around with this for years. I want you to get it done by the 1st of September. And in order to do that, I'm going to send a high-level delegation to Ada, Oklahoma to review the entire certification file and ask you all the questions that have been accumulated by all the naysayers in the past and let you explain it to them.
Yes, we were excluded from participation in the tab. And
Right.
Had we been included, we could have resolved most all of the questions that were the end point of the tab. That was just crazy. When they later sent the team to Ada, which we really appreciate, we were able to dig down and get into those and review them and satisfy all of them. And Lirio had given us a commitment that if the FAA was going to question or take a contrary stance to any of the technical considerations in our certification package, it was going to be backed up with data. So when they showed up in Ada and we reviewed all of ours, we gave them the opportunity to produce anything to the contrary, and there wasn't anything there.
Well, and that gets
Well
us
said, Jim.
that gets us full circle where we are now, and that is with the STCs and the long AML list in hand. And I certainly congratulate you. I'm looking forward to seeing how this fuel gets fielded. I know it won't be easy, but at least now we have a solution.
Paul, there's been some key people in this thing that have made critical decisions at critical times that have kept this going. One of them was Dorinda Baker, who was Air One until 5 years ago. The decision from AvFuel to become involved was critical. We've got a German chemistry partner, Lanxess, that stepped in, and most people don't appreciate this, but they did an enormous amount of very expensive laboratory chemistry work, verifying a bunch of the tests that are part of the specification requirements, using the best laboratory equipment in the world, from the laboratory at Bayer in Europe. Then all the way down the road from that to last week, Matt Johnson at California Aeronautical University stepping up to the plate and said, yeah, let's do this. There's, Larry you, she stepped up to the plate at the critical time, did the right thing for the right reasons.
The Wichita Aircraft Certification Office.
Yeah. And Mark Baker at AOPA, he's caught a enormous amount of flack from his membership since the Eagle program came out. But as he pointed out to Tim and I from time to time, that sometimes it's best that he do his work privately instead of publicly. And he has been instrumental in keeping key people in the FAA focused on substantive engineering issues instead of political issues. And God bless him for the help.
Yeah, and he's I interviewed him as part of this video series. Well, to close out, I congratulate you both. I've been covering this, it seems like most of my adult life, and now we've got a conclusion, and happy for the industry. George Braly and Tim Roehl, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Paul.
Have a good day, Paul. Thank you. Appreciate your focus on this subject.
Okay.